Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world right now. I'm Kate Joyce. I'm Director of Higher Education and Science at the British Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is the 7th webinar in the Higher Education Dialogue series, which has been organised by the British Council team in wider Europe and now forms part of Going Global. The series has been organised to help universities to discuss shared challenges resulting from the current pandemic and to share ideas around how we can best respond and prepare for the future. So we're delighted that this series has now become very global, and we're keen to know more about who you are as individuals and your role in transnational education. So please do complete the poll, which should hopefully be in front of you. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the future of transnational education, or TNE as it's widely known. Within the last few months, universities have worked incredibly hard to change their models and to move much of their teaching and learning and research online. This has been immensely challenging, but it has also led to some innovations. So in this session, we're going to be talking about what this means for TNE. So how will the current situation influence demand for new forms of distance learning? And will it accelerate the growth of transnational education, given that TNE can provide students with an international education without them having to travel and leave their own country? With the vast transformation of delivery models happening, this means that higher education could increasingly be available through a wider variety of programmes and platforms, including distance learning programmes, teaching partnerships, offshore campuses and MOOCs. So to discuss this important topic, we're going to hear insights from 4 distinguished panel members reflecting on their own experiences. So we will be hearing from Professor Sir Steve Smith, Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive of the University of Exeter, also Chair of Universities UK's International Policy Network. And most recently, Steve has been appointed as the UK's first international education champion. We're going to hear from Professor Jennifer Watling, Pro Vice Chancellor for International at Manchester Metropolitan University. Also, Professor John Brewer, Chief Executive Officer of NC UK, which provides university preparation and pathway qualifications to international students. And we'll hear from Dr. Vafar Kazdal, Vice Rector of Academic Affairs at ADA University, Azerbaijan. So we have collected some questions in advance from some of you to discuss with the panel, so thank you for sharing those. If you do have more questions, please use the Q&A function to ask questions so that they're addressed to all of the panel, and do also share any thoughts of your own. Also, if you see a question that perhaps resonates with you, raised by someone else, do like it, because then we can see which are the most popular questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So thanks to those of you who have also participated in the poll before this webinar. My colleague Summer Jha is now going to share the results with you so we can all see what kind of challenges we're all facing. Okay. Thanks, Summer. So finally, I just want to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded and shared after the session. So I'll now put a first question to the panel, and I'll start with Steve, if that's okay, Steve. So what have you had to adapt in your TNE programmes since the start of this pandemic? So what have been the challenges that you've been facing?
So if I start firstly with the kind of UUK perspective and then go on to a little bit about Exeter. Firstly, first thing to say is that lockdown conditions have varied by country. In the UK, our reaction has been to collaborate closely with local authorities and partners overseas to try and protect the student interest. That's been the number one thing. And often universities have had to adapt the TNE provision overseas before a lockdown was declared in the UK. And this has helped institutions respond better domestically to the new conditions. More specifically, universities have focused on 3 things. Number 1, Safeguarding students and staff. UK universities have ensured that health and safety precautionary and preventative measures were in place from the very start of the lockdown, following local advice and ensuring that students were safe and supported, including through appropriate mental health support measures. Where appropriate, universities have supported the repatriation of students or staff and have worked hard to ensure that support measures where appropriate are communicated and the feedback is acted on. Secondly, we've tried to maintain quality and standards in online provision. Overseas authorities have, for the most part, shown flexibility in the recognition of online provision during the pandemic. UK universities have generally reported good engagement of TNE students in online learning. Quality and standards have been upheld, supported by ad hoc QAA guidance. Sector bodies such as JISC have developed a wealth of resources to support the upskilling and reskilling of staff in delivering quality online learning. And finally, UK universities have tried to respond to students' individual circumstances. UK universities acknowledge that a digital divide affects staff and students overseas differently, depending on the location and their personal circumstances. Universities have shown remarkable flexibility in adapting policies related to assessments, extenuating circumstances, degree classification, or fitness to practice to individual conditions. Many efforts have been directed to maintaining students' senses of belonging to an academic community under social distancing. Concerning Exeter, I think the key point we'd want to stress is that TNE is such a catch-all term, including a wide range of provision. For Exeter, the majority of our TNE is delivered through articulation pathways. So the impact is on the desirability to articulate to the UK and the nature of the programme they'll follow when they do. In that sense, these are the same concerns that all our new and returning students have, and which I know all institutions are thinking about. The willingness to travel to the UK and the ability to travel to the UK, the welcome they'll receive, their safety and well-being, and the nature of the blended learning they'll receive for at least the first term will be key. We're also keeping in close touch with those institutions from which students articulate, as well as with our key global partners with whom we have joint research and PhDs. That joint research work, of course, is affected, but we're working as hard as we can to carry on our planned activities through virtual means. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. That's brilliant. Really interesting to hear your perspective, both in terms of the whole UK. I know you have a role supporting the whole of the UK sector, as well as some specific adaptations you've had to make at the University of Exeter. I think probably most of what you said resonates with everybody, wherever they are in the world, about the need for adaptability and flexibility to new models, but particularly the importance of the safeguarding and students' well-being and mental health in this challenging time. You raised also some key points around quality, which I'm sure we'll come back to, as well as the recognition of online learning. And it'd be interesting to talk perhaps a little bit later about whether we see a future trend here in terms of more online learning being recognised in more countries. But thanks, Steve. I think we'll now move on to Jenny. If you could tell us a bit about your perspective from Manchester Metropolitan University.
Thanks, Kate, and I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon participating in this particular discussion. I think Steve has already alluded to some of the points that I'm going to bring up, and I thought in my few minutes I'd make just a few general points about what we've had to confront as a consequence of the pandemic, and then just provide a couple of specific examples of what we've done at Manchester Met in response with our TNE partners. So following on from Steve, I think we all recognise the pandemic is global, but that the impacts have varied across countries and regions. And likewise, our TNE partnerships are not all the same. They vary in terms of the discipline area that we might be delivering programs in terms of the modes of delivery. They range from, as Steve said, articulation through to much closer sorts of relationships and franchises and validation, etc. So people in the audience will recognise many of these different models. And I think, this complexity has meant that we've had to, as a T&E partner, we've had to tailor our responses to the different needs of our T&E partners. And one thing that I think is really fundamental that's come out of this is that that complexity has really highlighted how critically important it is to have a very robust relationship with your T&E partners, a mutually supportive relationship where you understand each other and each other's needs and you can work closely together. And I think this particular time has probably really tested our partnerships and demonstrated to us exactly how good those relationships are in many cases. And I think just again, despite that variability, similar to what Steve outlined as being the UK response, we've had, I think, 3 principles that we've used in responding to the COVID pandemic with our T&E. The first has been absolutely the health and well-being of staff and students. That is really at the top of everything that we do. Secondly, it's supporting the ongoing delivery of quality learning experiences for those students. And I'm sure we'll come back to that. You've mentioned the quality assurance aspects of this, and I know people are interested in that. The third thing that for us has been really important is clear and regular and proactive communication with our partners and the students. You know, it's been really important that we have regular communication, not just with the staff in our T&E partnerships, but with our students. So, for example, I've sent letters to all the students who would have been graduating this year, this summer, but whose graduations, because of the pandemic, have had to be postponed or even possibly cancelled. And so, you know, we really are, again, putting the students at the heart of everything. So I think those are really the principles for us that were very important. Just a couple of quick examples of things we've had to manage. I know a lot of people will have had relationships where their staff would have been due to travel out, you know, the sort of flying faculty model. And as a consequence, people haven't been able to do that. So we've worked with a couple of our partners very rapidly to overcome that by shifting to blended and online delivery as one way of overcoming that particular problem. But the other thing we've done with a couple of partners, particularly well-established ones, is that we already had some staff in country who we had validated in terms of their ability to deliver teaching. So they've been able to provide the face-to-face experience for the students when our staff haven't been able to go out there. But our staff have worked very closely online with their colleagues in country in order to ensure the continuation of delivery for the students. And just another quick example of something else a partner has done for us is that they've provided spaces when they haven't had total lockdown. They've been able to provide spaces where students have been able to study or undertake assessments when their own home circumstances have not been particularly conducive. You know, they may live in a very small flat with a large family or something like that. And so a couple of partners have been able to help students out in country by opening up some facilities for them to enable them to continue to study or undertake assessments. So those are just, as I said, some general observations around what we've had to do in response to the pandemic, and a couple of examples of working with our T&E partners. And I just want to finish by really emphasising that important role of the relationship that is really at the heart of our T&E partnerships. Those relationships are key, even without the pandemic. If you haven't got that strong relationship with your partner, then you know you're not going to be able to deliver the quality for the students that I'm sure we are all wanting to achieve. So thanks very much, and I look forward to further discussions this afternoon.
Thank you, Jenny, for sharing such powerful insights and quite inspiring insights into how you've adapted, and perhaps the importance of strong relationships with partners to ensure, you know, the success of T&E in the current crisis and beyond. I think you've also picked up on other points raised by Steve again around quality and that experience for students. But I'm particularly interested in the point around equity and how to ensure that those students that perhaps aren't in a position to be able to access online learning very easily have options available to them. So I'm sure we'll come back to that. But I will now hand over to John to give us a perspective from NC UK. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, good morning. In terms of NC UK, we are not a university. We are essentially a pathway provider. And at the present time, we have around 3,000 students who are studying our qualifications, our foundation year qualification. And they are studying in around 70 study centres that we accredit in 50 countries around the world. And on any normal year, around 1,500 of those students would articulate from our foundation year to our partner universities in the UK and around the world. And they include Manchester Metropolitan University, Leeds and Exeter. And we're very proud of our relationships with both our study centres and our partner universities. So clearly, in terms of the challenges that we're facing, it's very much at that foundation year level and ensuring that our students firstly have the quality of education at our study centres that continues to give them the qualifications that they require to progress to their university of choice. So we've accelerated our online offer, we've introduced time-controlled assessments to replace examinations, and we've had regular webinars to assure our students of the quality of the qualifications that they're getting and to assure them that we're putting everything in place to give them the best chance of going to their university. But in terms of challenges, and I think I'll try and look at this from our perspective and from our conversations particularly that we've had with our students, because we have 3,000 students and our business is effectively helping those students to go to their university. So our biggest challenge at the moment, as both Jenny and Stephen have said, is to persuade our students that this is still a good time for them to go to their university of choice. And I think I go a little bit further than that. It's not just persuading the students, it's also their families, because as I know as a parent, and I'm sure there are many parents on the session this afternoon, they have a major voice in the destination, the lifestyles of their offspring. So we are looking at ways of really assuring them that the concerns that they are expressing can be overcome if they decide to go to university. And I think if I just refer to some of those key concerns, they are, of course, the quality of the online blended learning qualification study that they will be undertaking. That's clearly a concern that many of our students and their families are telling us on a regular basis. I think underpinning that, there is the key issue of value for money. If they are paying their international fees, will they be getting good value for money for studies that may initially be online, certainly from home? And I think as well, linked in with that is the fact that they will be losing, of course, those critical extracurricular activities that are a fundamental part of a university life. It's, as we all know, it's not just the studying, it's the lifestyle, the holistic way of life that you get at university that equips you for your future lives and future careers. And I think, again, as has already been alluded to this afternoon, the key concern that the students and their families are also expressing is safety. Is it a safe time for us to go to university this autumn? And indeed, what is the risk of a second wave? And if that happens, what would happen to a student who was perhaps a long way from home in an overseas environment? So those are the concerns. I think our response then has been to really have a fundamental shift in the way that we have had our dialogue, our communication with our students. And we have a very strong student support and services team that would normally work with our students to help them through their results process, through clearing. We've really ramped up all the work that we're doing with them to keep in regular dialogue with students. We've come up with very simple solutions, such as 10 good reasons why it is still good to go to university this autumn, even if you do find yourselves initially doing an online qualification. We've done a lot of work to assure them that the quality assurance of online qualifications that are offered by our partner universities is going to be of the highest possible quality. And indeed, we've also gone as far as to say that actually there's possibly no better time than at the moment for this autumn for students to go to their university of choice. I think they will get a great service. They will probably learn a different way of learning that will probably be the new way of learning for the future. And I think very importantly, and I say this as a parent as well, it offers them continuity of education. It means that they don't have to have a break in their studies. And that, of course, means that their employability comes that bit earlier in their lives. They have a greater career earning potential. And so there are real advantages in continuing with your education, particularly, as we know, at a time when deferring and having a traditional gap year of travelling the world is perhaps not as feasible as it may have been 12, 18 months ago. And I think finally, there is clearly the fact that if they are at home doing some form of online learning to start with, there are savings in accommodation, possibly savings in travel, that will mean that when the time does come for them to move to a face-to-face teaching environment, they can still continue their degrees, they can still graduate. And let's be honest, if they graduate in 3 years' time, nobody will remember that they had to spend the first 1 or 2 semesters doing some of their degree course online. So I think for me, it's clearly around messaging and facing up to the challenges that our students who are currently overseas are coming to us with as the challenges that they are facing and considering before they decide to come to university this autumn. Thank you.
Thanks, John. It was really interesting to get a different perspective, particularly around how we actually prepare and help students to kind of get into university and to not defer it, and to assure them that it will still be a quality experience. I think there are points you raised that I'd perhaps like to hear a bit more about shortly. I know for many people, going to university is not just about the academic experience and the course that a student is studying. You mentioned things like extracurricular activities. So perhaps we could come on to that again, as how we assure students in this situation we're in that they will still get that enriching experience. But first, I would just like to go to Vafa now for her perspective from Azerbaijan ADA University.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, colleagues, and all those participating at today's discussion. While I am listening to my colleagues and observing this whole, their speeches, their comments, I also think to myself that today's topic is about transnational education and where it is moving ahead. And I think that here is a very nice showcase of what is going to happen, or what is happening already with transnational education. All of us from all parts of the world sitting here and sharing our views on education. This is probably a very good example for that. I'm very happy that ADA University is represented today, and for 2 main reasons. One is it is one of the best practices in this part of the world in terms of a very well established transnational education model. Even though it's a young university, it's quite experienced, and in terms of transnational education, as I said, it has quite a rich experience. And the second reason why I am happy that today ADA is represented in this specific panel is that I think we have shown another good practice of transiting to online education in a very short period of time, and quite effectively. Of course, a lot of homework has been done before that, and a long time ago. We have been always investing in technology, and technology has been part of our pedagogical philosophy and educational philosophy ever since the day of its establishment. But as I listen to the main principles or to main objectives of my colleagues when switching to online education during the pandemic, I think the education has never been as global as these days. And the challenges we have all experienced and the objectives that we all pursued, I think, have been all the same. Therefore, I will not tell new things here because for us, for ADA, I took note of what you mentioned, and for us, for ADA, it has been the same. Number one was the safety of our students, safety of our faculty, and safety of our people in general, ADA people. And number two, academic continuity, but not only academic continuity, happened between students, faculty, administrators, and then the whole organization of the work. So our principles, our objectives, and integrity. I wanted to add about quality and integrity was a very important reason, not just education, but equality. And this is probably the reason why we are the only university here in Azerbaijan that made the decision that we will go with pass and fail grading policy, and we moved away from our usual policy of letter grade to the pass-fail grading. But this was a temporary adjustment. So our guiding principles, what I was trying to say, is no different than any other university all over the world. But for us, this experience was important. The most important outcome of this experience for us at ADA was a little bit different. I don't know, maybe it was the same for you. It is related to context. As I said, online component has been integrated into ADA education model to a lesser or greater extent, to a smaller extent, not to a greater extent. But this experience, in fact, helped us to dispel doubts and allay fears of online education. To me, this was the biggest discovery, to see that we should not be afraid of online education, and there are many benefits. And I want to stress here the role of students. Yes, it is also about faculty who are always resistant to changes, novelties, and especially when it comes to faculty. And I was always surprised that even faculty who got their PhDs from known universities in US, in UK, they were resistant to online education, similar to those who studied or did their PhDs here locally. And the students have always been resistant. And I see the greatest value of this transition in the thing that these fears, these doubts about online education, that it can be quality and it can provide us with many benefits that we have never thought before, I think it has been the greatest outcome of this experience. And this helped us to develop new principles that I believe will help us in future to adapt to transnational education. And I want to name of them is that online education or distance education can in fact be very complementary from many aspects, complementing national education with international education, complementing local faculty with international faculty, students here with abroad. It can enrich students' educational experience to a great extent. It can make the education more accessible and more affordable. It can make the education model more sustainable, and it can probably take the education to a new level from transnational to a global one. And I don't know, maybe a new global type of education models will come up as a response to transnational. I don't have an exact answer to it yet, but I think the universities will now be thinking more along that line. And these principles are now guiding us in adapting to future transnational education. So we have already launched a very interesting, unique dual degree with GW, George Washington University in US, and our ADA University has all these principles in it. So it has an online component. Students begin with online education, with online semester here at ADA. And they continue for a year here, but then they will spend a semester in person in GW. So we have a nice integration of online, and the reasons why is those principles that I mentioned before: accessibility, affordability, sustainability, wider access, cultural elements, adaptation elements. And perhaps this kind of models are the models that I think will be becoming more global models accepted by many universities. This is from my side. Thank you, and I look forward to questions. Kate.
Thank you very much, Varfa. That was really, really interesting and really inspiring, actually, to hear such a positive response from ADA University. I mean, you clearly were in a relatively good position in that you had been preparing for a long time in terms of technology for online learning, but also some of the benefits you raised around affordability and sustainability and kind of accessibility, I think, for students to be part of global education, not just transnational education. Before I come on to my next question, I just wanted to apologise to our audience. I know there are a few technological issues today, so just to reassure you that our team are working hard to resolve these. So hopefully you can at least hear us, even if you can't always see our faces. So I'm going to come on to my next question, which it resonates when Steve was talking about the importance of the recognition of these online qualifications, and there have been some kind of rapid changes in regulations in a number of countries, so that online education or online qualifications that perhaps previously weren't recognised are now being recognised. So I'm just wondering, perhaps coming to Steve first, how you think the COVID-19 pandemic might change the future landscape of TNE. Do you think there will be an increase in recognition? And also, do you see that there may be particular models of TNE which grow in particular?
I suppose the basic answer is that I think what will happen is it will continue existing trends. Could be wrong on this, but it's better to be wrong than vague. And my own view is that there's a global worldwide trend towards middle classes wanting to take part in higher education. As people get more income, they want to do this. That, of course, is an aspiration for everyone. But people who've got the money to travel abroad or to study regionally, it's really important that they can do so. I suppose I'd say there are three big trends that will come out of this. One, there'll be much more online and blended learning components in education. You know, the large expansions of distance learning provision across borders, students continuing their studies from home in their countries of origin. It's proven that that kind of provision can actually meet students' expectations. So as recognitions of distance learning and digital literacy improves, more online and blended elements will be incorporated to existing and new TNE programs, in the process, of course, helping significantly to widen access to underrepresented groups such as minorities, women or mature students. Second, I think there'll be more intra-regional mobility. I think we've seen an increase in that, particularly in Asia, as new nations become net receivers of international students. The UK's education offer, kept in high regard worldwide, needs to be leveraged to respond to enhanced demand for intra-regional mobility. Finally, more collaborative provision. If the crisis has proved something, it's that in our times of crisis, we need to rely on our partners. Renewed trust, enhanced cooperation in credit, qualification, recognition will lead universities to increase bidirectional TNE partnerships with equal contribution from different partners. There'll also need to be, I think, more creativity in program design, including micro-credentialing and multiple site degrees. So, to be honest, I think it will continue the trends that have happened, but there's no doubt that what the crisis has shown is that different forms of learning are possible, and that crucially we can ensure that the quality is of a very high standard, so it's not seen as a secondary or a second order possibility for students to take. Great,
thank you, Steve. Yeah, you raised the point of quality again, and I think there's a lot of hard work going into ensuring the quality of online education provision. One of the other points I wanted to pick up that's come up in the discussion so far, and I know has come in some of the questions from the audience, is around how do we meet students' expectations. So this isn't just about a quality education, but how do we ensure that it engages and motivates them in a more rounded way, given that they won't be able to participate in the same way in some of the extracurricular activities that many people benefit from when they go to university. So perhaps if we could go to John actually first for that question, because I know you did mention this, that you've been sending out some reassuring messages. How do you see that universities can ensure an enriching experience for students online?
There's no easy answer to that, Kate. I think clearly if you are not on campus, and I'm sure many of us can remember back to our university days, where being on campus and taking part in the clubs and societies, sports teams and so on is very much part of that fabric of university life. So if that goes, then clearly we have to try and meet that expectation with something else. Now, I suppose today's generation of students is much more used to interactive work online with their friends. I know my daughter's at university and spends a lot of time with her clubs and societies, but actually doing it on an online basis. So I think it is beholden on the universities to try and, wherever possible, instill that collegiate community feel through different methods. But it won't be easy, and I think we have to recognise that fact. And there is no substitute for taking part in an art society or representing the university in a soccer match or a rugby match if you're not physically on campus. So I think we do have to be aware of that. But I think going back to Steve's point just now, if we have the right quality of education, then that will help to offset some of that loss of the extracurricular activities. And I was certainly involved in, about 5 or 6 years ago, developing an online master's degree in strength and conditioning at one of my previous universities, and that was very much a sort of a shaky camera in the back of the gym and the lecture theatre, which produced some form of education, which was actually quite popular. But I think we've moved way beyond that into an era where we can really get good quality interactive teaching and learning online. And I think it's so important that we do that, because first and foremost, that is what students are really after. I think what we'll also start to see is this trend for students, instead of perhaps doing a 1+2 degree, moving to do 2+1, and actually just spending a slightly shorter amount of time away from home, where again at the end of their degree they can still experience that more holistic part of university life. But I think we have to be realistic and be honest that if you are living from home and doing much of your degree on an online distance-based learning way, it is a very different experience to one where you are in a hall of residence on a campus, and we have to accept that and do our very best to mitigate it.
Great, thanks, John. I'd also like to bring in Vafa for this question, because I know that, Vafa, you did talk about the benefits of TNE models and distance learning models and the benefits to the students. So I'm wondering on what your view is on this, around how to make the kind of online experience as enriching as the offline experience of education.
I think it all depends on. I mean, I would agree with John that to the extent that is possible, we have to keep the both. I mean, the campus experience will never be replaced by online experience, because it's a different experience. But to me, the foundational purposes, the foundational goals, this is what matters. If the students want to get that experience, if the students want to get that international experience, transnational experience, then regardless of the mode of it delivery, right? It is important for the university to provide that opportunity, but it is also the motivation of the students, the accountability of the students to see what the opportunities are, what are the possible opportunities right now, and benefit from those opportunities. And if the university, I think the success of the university is already in that the university provides that opportunity, or the universities together provide that opportunity. So that fundamental purpose to me is the most important, and whether the education system, the universities provide those opportunities, depending on the current situation. I don't know whether I answered your question or no. But here is a lot of, it's not only about administrators, it's not only about faculty, it's not about people who run, but it's equal responsibility and equal accountability for the students, and to understand what they need, what they want, and from what they can benefit in the current situation and in the current realia.
Thanks, Vafa. And yes, absolutely, you responded to the question, and I think you also raised the point there, perhaps, I don't know if I've heard it on the call earlier, but about accountability. And so I guess my next question, I'm interested in how TNE partnerships are embedded in universities within leadership, and where the accountability sits to ensuring what makes a successful TNE partnership, and are we seeing a change in approach to these partnerships as a result of the pandemic, perhaps more resource put into them? And perhaps Jenny, if I could start with you, because I know you talked a lot about the strength of the partnerships between Manchester Met and your partners. So I'm wondering if you see that as being something which might increase, and perhaps those partnerships will also feed into other university agendas like research.
Thanks, Kate. And I think certainly for my university, at any rate, TNE has always been a part of our internationalisation strategy. And I'm assuming that that's probably the same for many other universities. And I think that perhaps what might happen as a consequence of the current situation is that people might review the nature of the TNE partnerships that they engage in, the online and the digital opportunities. You know, technologies now provide different opportunities for developing TNE partnerships. And I think, just sort of leading on a little bit from the previous discussion, I think what we're going to see is a much wider range in terms of the types of TNE opportunities that exist. And different institutions, of course, will have different missions, institutional missions, and they will select the nature of the partnerships that work for them and for the particular discipline areas that they have strengths in, and for their own institutional strategies. So I think, you know, we will continue to see universities putting resource into TNE. I don't think, though, that it will ever replace or exceed the activity that many universities have around on-campus recruitment of students. That is still going to be very much the prime objective for most UK, and I would suspect many other universities around the world. And a couple of reasons for that, and I think one of the main ones being something we've alluded to, and that is that students still very much are looking for that on-campus part of their experience. You know, being able to come to a university and everything that goes along with that. And I would add that it's not just the university, but the city and the country in which the university is located. That's also part of the experience for many international students when they travel in order to study. So I think, you know, TNE, as I said, it's definitely going to continue to be an important part of university strategies, and that it will just, I think it will just expand in terms of the variety of TNE partnerships that we're going to see.
Thanks, Jenny. I think that's interesting, and it's a nice segue into a question that's come in from the audience, which is, to what extent are your university senior leadership teams looking at TNE partnerships, particularly articulations, progressions, to help bolster international student recruitment in the next few years? So perhaps, Jenny, given you've just been talking about the relationship between TNE and traditional student recruitment, you could say a few words on behalf of your university.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Kate. So as I said previously, I don't see it overtaking the on-campus recruitment activity at all. And I think, you know, the other thing to remember about TNE is that it takes time. You know, it's not something that you can develop overnight. The relationships that I referred to earlier on in the discussion often take years to develop and to maintain. And so TNE is a long game. You know, it's something that universities enter into, you know, without expecting to get necessarily quick returns from it. And as you said, it also, you mentioned previously, it also provides an opportunity to expand the relationship into other areas of activity, and research and student exchange, staff exchange, things like this are also very important aspects of TNE. So, you know, the short answer is I don't see it replacing on-campus recruitment, becoming more important than that. I see it as pretty much as it always has been, as something, a significant and important part of the overall internationalization strategy of any university.
Yeah, and I can see Steve just nodded there, so I'm guessing, Steve, you have a similar view.
Yeah, very, very similar to Jenny. I mean, I think the key issue is not TNE in and of itself. It's what's the role of international education, people travelling across boundaries, studying across boundaries, researching across boundaries. I mean, the key point, certainly from the research perspective, as everyone knows, is the best quality research now appears increasingly to be done across international borders. So the world is becoming more international as we search for vaccines to deal with COVID-19, or as we try to deal with climate change, or all the kinds of issues that are facing the world. So the setting is one of increasing internationalization. My reading is exactly Jenny's. I think TNE will be part of that. I don't think it does actually alter the desire of a lot of people to want to travel to another country to study. But the key point, and it's come up in the chat and I've been watching it, it's about quality, Kate. It's about quality. It's got to be the same quality. It can't be, as someone put it in the chat, it can't be travel if you're wealthy and do TNE or distance learning if you're not wealthy. I mean, British universities have an incredibly high quality of delivery, and it's absolutely central that we work together to make sure that whichever mode you study, you get a good quality education with good quality outcomes. It's the learning outcomes that matter most in all of these things, not the inputs. So I see it as part of that way forward. And I would say the key issue is really going to be how long we're in this particular pandemic, what that does to the ability of people to travel. You know, we're looking at, where I work, at chartering planes in the autumn to bring students from other parts of the world, because if they can't travel on commercial flights, well, if that's the case, then TNE will be more of an interesting option for us, because frankly, people may not be able to travel. So I think it's that balance that's key.
I think I'm hearing that a lot, and I have glanced at the chat and seen there is a lot about that balance, the importance of the blended model seems to be the area where there's a lot of focus at the moment. And I think, Steve, you've just really reinforced how much hard work is going to ensure that universities prepare students for the autumn so that they get that quality education, whether it's flying on a special flight or doing an online course. I see Jenny has her hand up, so I'll just go over to Jenny now to comment.
Thanks, Kate. Just very, very briefly, I just wanted to pick up on the point about quality that Steve raised, and particularly with regard to the current situation and the increased use by universities of online and blended approaches. And I think that one of the things we can certainly say to our international students is that this is something that we're doing for all students. It's not just something that we're doing for international students. We're having to do it for our UK students as well, who equally may have difficulty travelling to campus. So I just wanted to make that quick point.
Yeah, it's a good point, and the fact that this applies to people wherever they are in the world, and whether they have to travel miles, to the other side of the world, or perhaps not even that far. But we're all in a very similar situation. If I could just come on to John a minute, because we've been talking about, the importance of providing that quality experience for students from this autumn and trying to prepare them for that. I'm just wondering, from your experience, which of these messages has most resonated with students?
I think it is the quality of the online qualification, and I think it reflects Steve's point and Jenny's point just now, that it's the quality of the degree that they will be studying that is going to be absolutely critical to them. But I would again flag up something that I mentioned right at the start, which is the value for money that qualification is offering, because clearly we're asking them, universities are asking them to pay their fees, and in considering whether they are going to pay what for many of them is a significant sum of money, they and their families have to be reassured that they are getting the value for money that they require. And I think our subtle messaging is that on the face of it, it may seem as if you're being asked to pay a similar amount for a different product than you would have had you gone to the campus. But don't forget, your career earnings will be enhanced by a further year of employability, and you will be making savings elsewhere, particularly in accommodation costs. But I think, again, Steve's point was really relevant around the hunt for a vaccine, and we don't know what's happening with the virus. And I think until we know whether there is a vaccine and whether the virus will die out, we're not yet really sure whether we're talking here today about the new normal for the long term, or whether we are just talking about a short or a medium term solution to a problem that we all very much hope is going to go away. And I think if it is a short term, medium term solution to a problem that is going away, then I think very quickly what we'll see is that move back towards students doing what we would see as more traditional TNE with articulation models that mean students come to campus for that holistic experience. If, on the other hand, there isn't the vaccine, the virus doesn't die out, then I think we are looking at a new normal, but with much greater quality assurance on the qualification and doing everything we can to still install a community feel for the students who are studying. The other thing I would also flag up very, very quickly is it's so important that that quality assurance is there for potential employers as well. And I spent most of my career working in industry before I went into academia. And I know, having interviewed many young people, often for their first jobs, the quality of the qualification, the quality of the university that they have come from is something that employers will always be looking at. So we have to make sure that any form of online delivery still carries the same academic currency as a more traditional face-to-face qualification.
Yeah, that's a very good point about the importance of considering employers and what they're looking for and their expectations. It's interesting that you see this as perhaps temporary, you know, the focus on more distance or blended learning.
With a legacy of higher quality online and blended learning delivery. And I think we'd all, hope that as we come out of this, and hopefully there is a vaccine and the virus goes away, that we do see a move back towards the more traditional ways, but there will still, I'm sure, be far more study done through online delivery, but it will be of a much higher quality than we could ever have envisaged even 6 months ago, before many universities and ourselves as a pathway provider were effectively forced to move towards a high quality online way of learning.
Thanks, John. I'd just like to bring Steve in now.
Yeah, just to say that, I mean, John's got it completely right as well. I mean, the first thing we had to do was to look at our 24,000 students on campuses here and make sure we were able to make the move towards online delivery and assessment. And that's been heroic achievement by academic and professional colleagues to do that. We've had actually fewer concerns raised this year than in normal years. So it's been really successful. But the bottom line of it all, it's the crisis has altered the way in which we deliver education, full stop. And I don't think we'll be going back to a simple model as it was before. I mean, we're planning for the autumn term for all lectures to be online, even if we're able, as we expect, to be on campus. I think we'll be moving much more towards blended, which actually means distance learning, TNE, progression routes and campus education all merge more than they did before. But the key is it's got to be the quality, because if it isn't the quality, it's not really able for the UK to maintain the position that it's always held as a high quality educational system.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that I've heard this a number of times, that actually we're not seeing completely new developments here. We're seeing an acceleration of things that were already starting to change, you know, more TNE programs, more blended learning. And I just would like to bring in Vafa now, because Vafa did talk about the preparations that ADA University had been making over a number of years to improve technology and to improve the online learning for students. You also talked about the strength of your partnerships. I think you mentioned, was it George Washington University?
Right.
So just to slightly take a different angle to this conversation, is if we're seeing an increase in these kind of partnership models, what are those success factors? What has really made those a strong partnerships? And have there been specific challenges that you've had to overcome?
Thank you, Kate. Well, I also want to touch upon the question of quality, and this is the reason why I mentioned that the biggest takeaway from us as ADA from this experience was that you can provide online education, quality online education, right? Quality is a fundamental issue, is a fundamental goal. And online and traditional, these are two different modalities. I think if you can provide a quality education in traditional in-person teaching, you should be able to provide the same quality education in online modality. So this is very important for us as well. When it comes to the partnership question that you ask about partnership, I think online element, in fact, adding the new online element to that partnership was one of the factors that make this new kind of partnership successful, because we have been thinking a lot whether the students should spend entire year at GW. You know yourself that it requires more costs, more finances, more human resources managing this whole thing. And then it's also a matter of adaptation. So we thought that adaptation, not only in terms of to the new environment in US, but also adaptation to new type of program, requirements of the program. So that's why we thought that starting with online semester here in at ADA, but taking classes, as I said, remotely from GW would be a good start, and then allowing our students exposure to the education system, to the classes at GW a little bit later when they have the experience. So I think these are all the elements, and then different exchanges, research partnership between their faculty and our faculty. This partnership has many multiple objectives, purposes, and again, the online element is also a significant component of it that made this agreement possible.
I've somehow ended up muted. Jenny, do you have anything else that you'd like to add around the kind of success factors for a TNE partnership, things that you've learned from your own experience?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I'm very happy to talk about that. And I think that there's I guess a few things that are quite fundamental to the success of the partnership. One of them is that, first of all, you've got to have shared goals. You've both got to be in agreement about what it is that you want from the partnership. It has to be mutually beneficial. So I think that's really important. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling uphill the whole time to get it to work. I think secondly, it's about all the classic aspects of relationship building. You have to work at it. You know, you have to be constantly in communication with your partners. You have to be able to have the tough conversations with them, you know, talk through the issues. And quality assurance, you know, is one of the key ones. And when you establish any kind of partnership in a TNE, with a TNE sort of ambition, I guess, one of the things that every university does is it invests a lot of time and effort in both due diligence around the partner and ensuring the quality of the curriculum and the modalities for the delivery of that curriculum for the students. So getting those fundamentals right, I think, is really key. And, you know, I think while that partnership continues to deliver for both parties, then it will be a success for the students and putting the students at the heart of it. So I think that I can summarize it. That's probably what I'd say.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny. And just again, I'm hearing the same words again and again around quality assurance, that this is critical to ensuring the TNE models are successful, but also distance and online learning in general. I've been reminded that we have a second poll, which, given we've got only a few minutes left, I'd just like to put this to the audience. So you should see the question about, does this pandemic increase your appetite to explore opportunities to set up TNE programmes with foreign universities? So that is actually a question for our audience, but it links in nicely to a final question that I had actually for any of the panelists, but perhaps start with Steve, because I think Steve will probably have a view on this. Whether you think that the current situation is likely to change the kind of global geography of TNE, you know, particularly for the UK sector. Will we, you know, be looking beyond the traditional markets that we've worked in internationally?
Oh, that's a big question. I think it will change things. I think, although to be honest, Kate, I think it's more what we do in the UK that's going to change things. I mean, the change to the post-study work visa, the announcement yesterday about blended learning being acceptable for post-study work, I think that's really, really significant. I think the big change is the one that the other panelists have talked about. It's the fact that the world we're moving into is going to be more blended. And if it's more blended, it therefore prevents a stark binary choice between travelling and TNE. And my gut feeling is that more people in the world will want education. They'll want to work with the best institutions for them, wherever they are in the world. That could be locally, it could be in partnership, it could be travelling. But I think that surge, that urge even for education is so central to human development that my view is TNE fits into it. But the core is we've got to ensure that whatever we do there is of the highest possible quality. Otherwise, we get a kind of a political economy of education, which would be very damaging. But the underlying trends, I think, are the absolutely key things. Different markets will come and go, but the trends are towards greater international participation, both in research and in education.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. I'm seeing kind of nods from the other panelists. So before we close, I just wonder if anyone wants to make any other final comments. I think we're all in agreement with Steve's final point there. And I'd just like to really thank you for participating in today's session. I think it's been a really rich and interesting discussion. A particular thanks to our panelists for sharing their own insights and experiences, you know, making such brilliant contributions. But also a big thanks to our audience globally for joining. And I hope you will join us again for our next session, which is the same time next week. It's at Wednesday, the 24th of June at 2 p.m. UK time. And the topic will be, how can universities support their academic staff? So how can universities support their academic staff, you know, enabling them to not only rise to the current challenges, but also to prepare them for the future. So I'd just like to again thank our excellent panelists and also to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you.
Thank you.